Hello, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Podcast Digest. This is episode 67. This is going to be a recommendation show, folks. It has been about 7 weeks. Episode 60 was the last recommendation show, and that was back with Rob McGinley-Myers from Anxious Machine, a member of the Herd. And this week, I've got another great co-host. I do not call these, interviews or guests. I call them co-hosts because they are going to help me tell you about two great shows each, so you will come away from this episode with 4 new things to add to your subscription list. So if I haven't ruined your subscription list yet with overwhelming awesomeness, hopefully by the end of this episode, we will have accomplished that. My partner in crime for this episode to help accomplish that mission, maybe you've heard of her, maybe not, but if you haven't, I would highly suggest you get to know her and her work. Dana Gerber-Margie from the Audio Signal joins me. It is a newsletter about podcasts, and she does, and as some of my previous guests have, the written form of a lot of what I do here on the Podcast Digest. So, Dana, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk a little podcasting. And but before we get into that stuff, I want folks to get to know a little bit about you. So anyone who doesn't know who you are or what it is that you do with the Audio Signal, tell folks a little bit about yourself and about the newsletter.
Great, thank you. So my name is Dana, and biggest thing is I'm an archivist by training. So part of my shtick over at the Audio Signal is that I'm also bringing in news about, announcements from the library, archives, and oral history world. And then I really like to highlight favorite archival audio. A little bit of my background, I studied history at UC Berkeley. I'm a California native, and I worked in libraries doing public services for a long time. And then I went to graduate school for library studies here in Madison, Wisconsin. So, big change, and I was telling you earlier about the snow that's coming. And I graduated in 2013, and now I work as an audio archivist. So kind of the same, thing as, not same thing, but there's a lot there. I listen to a lot of audio. I listen to a lot of podcasts while on the job. And in February, I woke up and I decided I wanted to write a newsletter because I didn't think anyone else was doing it. And I made my logo and I started writing it up, and I got, the website all done. And then a few weeks later, I found out that a lot of other people were doing it. But I still stick with my little archive side of it. And I'm really, really, really enjoying it. It's definitely a lot of work. There's a lot to keep up with, but it's pretty exciting. And I come out on Sunday night. How does one subscribe to receive the Audio Signal? Oh, that is a great question. That would be tinyletter.com/theaudiosignal.
Awesome. And links will be in the show notes, folks. As you know, they always are. So if you guys want regular Sunday evening deliveries of more great stuff, how many shows per episode or per issue, I guess would be the term, are you trying to recommend? Do you have sort of a standard approach, format, any particular type of podcast you specialize in?
Wow. It changes kind of every week. I would say I'm always at least doing 5 and sometimes going as high as 15. And then what I've been doing lately is, because there is such an explosion in podcasts, is I'll do you might also be interested in, and then some bullet points of what to listen to. What was your other question?
Is there particular areas that you prefer to cover?
I really love investigative journalism and economics podcasts. Wow, I sound really boring now. But and I really like history. So I'm just a really curious person, and I really like to learn about the world around me. That does not mean that I don't love narrative as well. I just need kind of a mix of nonfiction, investigative stuff, and like Radiolab or This American Life as well.
So the Audio Signal launched in February, you mentioned. And so just a quick synopsis. How's it been going so far?
It's going great, actually. I really expected only my mom and dad to read. and like a few friends that pitied me. But then I got mentioned in the Wall Street Journal.
Wow.
And that was totally by Jake Shapiro of PRX. And I didn't like it was that was the funniest day because I kept getting all these subscriptions, and I was like texting some friends like, I think I got hacked or something. Like I think something went wrong and my email address got like sold to some, I don't know what's happening. And then someone was like, honey, you got mentioned in the Wall Street Journal.
Wow.
So it's been going really, really well. I try to keep it pretty consistent, but since I, do a lot of other stuff, sometimes it's hard on the weekends to always get to it. But I'm at about 32 issues at this point. And it's a lot of fun. It's a really fun community to be a part of too.
So when you say 5 to 15, are you highlighting individual episodes or are those actual shows?
Individual episodes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And sometimes it might be a show, but that's usually like a bullet point
right
kind of thing. But yeah, it's usually an individual episode that really spoke to me. With so many podcasts becoming serialized, that's becoming kind of a problem, because like I mentioned Limetown and I mentioned The Message early on, or The Wisest that recently came out. So it's really easy to mention, here's the first podcast and now listen to all the rest. But sometimes Limetown will come out, later. Like the third episode of Limetown to me was amazing. And it was kind of weird to recommend that, but also have to say, and remember to go back and listen to everything else.
Yeah, that's any number of ones nowadays, especially on the, I don't know what the correct term is, sort of the docu-personal ones. I'm thinking specifically about two former guests, Tally Abacassis with First Day Back and Megan Tan with Millennial. They are sort of in the process of documenting their own personal or professional journeys, if you will, and they're excellent shows, but it doesn't really feel right if you just jump in. You kind of got to go back to episode 1 to kind of follow along the story. Absolutely.
I've had I love Millennial and I love First Day Back. I'm a huge fan of just everything in the herd, and I always want to mention them, but yeah, it can be hard. But I often break my, the difficulty and just mention it and say like, here's episode 8 of Megan Tan's, and just listen to everything else. You won't be sad.
So speaking of difficulties here, Dana, you mentioned it once already, and you and I were talking before hitting record as well, dealing with the overwhelming volume. As any of those people that you've mentioned that do sort of, the newsletters or the websites or the podcasts that focus on the world of podcasting, one of our constant challenges is keeping up, if you will. Yeah. What are some of the tools or tricks of the trade that you employ throughout the course of a week to make sure you're ready to put out something awesome on Sunday night?
Well, first of all, on the bus and at work, I can be kind of antisocial. So I listen on my headphones, and if I'm on the elevator and someone says like, hi, I kind of like, hi, but then see if they're going to say anything else because I'm still listening. The other thing is I know this is a no-no for you, but I do actually speed up my podcasts.
Right.
If it's meant to be listened to like a sound art or, beautifully produced, I don't usually speed those up, but especially if it's like an interview, I speed it up to like 1.3 or
that's
so.
Not too bad.
Yeah, so I usually only notice it in between the breaks with the music. Yeah, so I do those kind of things. I listen while I bake, and I listen while I'm at home and chores. But the bigger thing I've had to do, other than like filling my life with listening, is culling and starting to say, like just starting to be more careful about what I choose to press play on. And it makes me really sad, but it also kind of means that the competition out there is getting, more fierce. So hopefully it means also people are getting really good. I stick with my favorites, and I have a favorites list I use Pocket Casts.
Yes. Yeah. I know I liked you, Dana. I'm a Pocket Cast user myself.
I love Pocket Casts. It's so great. And I use the filters a lot. So at night, I really like to listen to history podcasts to kind of like calm me down and get me ready for bed. So I have a filter with all my history podcasts, and then I have a filter with my favorites so that I always, like if I have, right now my backlog is I have to listen to about 115 podcasts to catch up.
Wow.
Yeah. So my favorites list, though, is only like at 33 or so right now.
So that 115, is that shows or episodes?
Episodes. I'm subscribed to 375 shows.
Holy mackerel. Wow.
A lot of them have like stopped doing their thing.
Right.
But I'm kind of just keeping up just in case.
So you don't regularly go back and trim that number down. That's just kind of your ever-growing history.
Yeah, I think it's because I want to make sure that if something does, like, I don't listen to WTF with Mark Maron a lot. Because I actually don't care that much about celebrities.
Right.
But like when Obama came on, I really wanted to listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in Lorne Michaels, but I don't really, like, I don't watch a lot of TV, so I didn't watch SNL growing up a lot, so it was kind of like sort of interesting to me, but I got bored kind of midway, you know? That's the other thing is I'm pretty comfortable now with not finishing.
Right.
And I used to have that trouble. I'm an avid reader too, and I've always had trouble like finishing or not finishing a book. Like I'll finish a book even if I think it's a terrible book. But lately I've gotten so much better at being like, you know what? Life is so short and I'm going to die soon. So
that's a great thought.
So I don't want to finish this. You know, I don't want to give this any more time. I want to give like the good work the attention it deserves. And then I have just like my pet projects and loves, and there's some stuff that I know my readers might not like, but is important to me. So I listen to that too.
Right. And I can completely understand that. And I don't want to get too shop talky for folks listening to this, but the type I ask these questions because I know these are questions that I've heard from people who've asked me very similar things, like how do you find new shows, how do you deal with all of your subscriptions, how do you choose what to highlight, and while it may be a little inside baseball, I think folks who listen to this show or subscribe to the audio signal legitimately would like to know kind of how the cake is baked, so to speak,
right.
on these type of things. So I like to give people a little peek behind the curtain on there, and that's about all the references I can throw out as well as all the similes and metaphors. And
it is really interesting, though. I feel like for a year or so, all of us were so concerned with discovery, and then now all of us are really concerned with like, holy crap, how do I keep up? Well,
what's interesting now, I think it's so funny. People always say that podcasting has a discovery problem. Mm-hmm. And on a top line, metaphorical sense, I agree with that. However, I think there are so many people out there now doing so many of these type of things that you're doing, that I'm doing, that, like I guess you could say my guest last week, Harry Duran with Podcast Junkies, or I was his guest, or whatever that was we did last week, and so many more. There's previous guests that I've had that also highlight, Devin from the Timbre, or Ryan Steiner from Ryan's Podcast Reviews. There's so many people out there that are helping with the discovery. And you mentioned before, earbud.fm is out there now from NPR. And there are a lot of people thinking about how to help people find the stuff. But what's interesting about it almost becomes like now you almost have a discoverability issue with those things that help discoverability, because now how do people even find those things? How do people find your newsletter or the website, the Timbre, or the show like the Podcast Digest? So it's out there. It's just a question of getting what we do out in front of those who are just dipping their toe in to allow us to help guide them through those initial choppy waters. And then I think everything will be fine.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's going to be a matter right now of like a sifting where people are kind of not exactly forming cliques, but like realizing what's important to them. And I'm realizing more that I'm not going to be a newsletter that is for everybody. Right. It's going to be kind of more a certain like type of person goes to my newsletter. And if that keeps me small, I'm totally fine with that. I'd rather have like a small, tight-knit community than trying to please everybody And there's so many podcasts out there for so many different types of people and interests and hobbies, and it's exciting.
Yeah, we're kind
hard
of
to
like
keep up.
any other form of entertainment. We're like a band or we're like a stand-up comedian. We all may love the genre, but you don't love every stand-up comedian or you don't love every band in the world. It's like, oh, I like music. I like all bands. No,
Yeah,
you've got your favorites, and that's kind of like what we're doing
absolutely.
here. It's
And we're just kind of like keeping up,
exactly.
or like we're getting into it. We're still a new thing. And also, I don't know if you've heard about it, but Product Hunt
Yes.
is now doing like episode recommendations, which I think is a pretty cool thing. I still think their site's a little bit like, not, maybe clunky isn't the word, but I'll be happy when it's a little bit more streamlined and there's more episodes up. And I know that could be me doing it, but I'm busy.
Yeah, I think
You know?
I think they are in beta right now. I had a back and forth with one of the people who was responsible for something in the launch, and I really was excited about it. And then I found out something that kind of irked me a little bit. Basically, I couldn't be on there as the Podcast Digest. I could only be on there as me personally. So, which is fine. I guess they want to make sure there's faces behind names, and then they end up tying, the individuals to a particular show. So if you follow Product Hunt on Twitter, you will see them tweet at people. Like they just tweeted at Helen Zaltzman this week and said, Helen Zaltzman, you've been added as the producer / host of The Illusionist. And Helen, of course, in her wonderful way, responded appropriately.
I love Helen. She's the best.
Yes. And my thought is that in the podcasting space, this is what I'm known as. This is the only thing I want to be known as, and nobody knows who Dan Lizette is. But I like to think some people know who the Podcast Digest is, what it is. And I was really excited about going on there and this, that, and the other. And then when the guy told me, you need to sign up as an individual, I was like, I mean, it's still nice. I still get the recommendations. I get I'm on their email list, and it's great what they're doing. I just wish I would have been able to be a little more of an active part of those type of things. But, at least
it's still new.
Folks are out there trying. So, well, let's talk about a different component of audio and sort of my opening conversation discussion segment, if you will. You mentioned just in passing what you do for a day job, but it was something that I wanted to talk more about because it's something I don't know much about myself, and it does have to do with audio. And I was curious about your day job, how you got into this. Tell folks what it is and what it is you spend all day doing.
Thank you so much. This is also like an outreach thing for archivists. But as an archivist, so what we do is we collect and preserve documents for the future. That's kind of in a basic nutshell what it means. Oh, collect, preserve, and give access to documents. That's a big thing too. So I work in a big historical institution that has a large vault that's in the basement. It's always chilled, and it always holds analog audio like cassettes, open reels. We also have discs, all sorts of different kinds of discs. And I digitize the analog audio for patrons who are interested in it. And patrons are usually scholars and researchers, but, anyone can come. And then I also provide like conservation work to that analog audio. So cassettes are often missing like their pressure pads or I have to add leader to an open reel. And that's just I'm sure you know what an open reel is, but it's magnetic tape. So I just have to do like things to make sure that it stays safe for longer before we can digitize it. And I have to make sure to document all my actions so that archivists in 100 years won't have to be just like WTF about what I did and why I did it. So that's the basic like physical part of my job. And then a huge part of it is metadata. So metadata is data about data. So it's information about the thing that I just recorded. And then on top of that, which this is what worries me about the podcasting world right now, is we're also engaged in several digital preservation endeavors. So this basically means that we're trying to make sure that all of our digital files can actually last into the future. Let's see how I got into it. Oh, I took an aptitude test in high school.
And this is what they recommended for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
good
an
test.
test, and it was right at the top, and it said archivist, and it said like collects documents, and it said something funny like collects so that if aliens visited Earth, they'd have an idea of what we were like as a species. And I was like, that's fascinating. And then when I went to college, I knew I had to study certain kind of fields to get into it. And I went with history, and I ended up studying Russian history, which I was hoping was going to work in my career, but it hasn't so far. I have translated some Russian for some of my fellow archivists before, so that was cool. And yeah, I don't know if you have any more questions about it.
This audio that you're working with generally, or can it even be generalized? Like, what is this audio of more often than not?
Yeah. That I should have explained that. It's a lot of different things. So archivists traditionally, you might think of like librarians as they hold published materials that are collected by a certain person or a certain group that they then write on or collect and publish on a certain topic, right? So archivists, we collect by the creators, by the record creators themselves. So we have collecting policies, which keeps each institution kind of honest, but also helps them like with the overwhelming amount of stuff there is to save. So our collecting institution focuses on Wisconsin history, and we also do things like labor history, socialist history, all sorts of things. So it depends on the collection that we receive of what the audio will be. We are a state institution, so we collect things from state agencies. So sometimes we get really boring audio of like recorded board meetings from 1996.
Right.
And that's just collected because it's state law that it has to be collected and saved and preserved. But then we have a really great interview with Daisy Bates, one of the women who had she was with the Arkansas 9 or 5. No, I can't remember. But she had a rock thrown through her window, and with like a KKK death threat on it. And we have a lot of her papers because we collect a lot of civil rights stuff. So we have interviews with her. There's a journalist that we collect, Michael O'Brien, and he did some books on football. So then we collected his raw interviews. And these are the raw interviews that he used to write his book. So the interviews were never published, but we have them now. What else do we do? We have we have some radio too. And we have like, sometimes there's like a politician who might have like ad spots on their local channels about why you should vote for them. So we have some of that. We have really like everything.
So is this something, to your knowledge, that most, what would you say, counties or states nationwide probably have an organization like yours responsible for doing something similar?
Well, by law, they have to.
Okay.
By law, every state should have like an institution that will collect state records. We are actually quite unique because we collect North American history and we have like this labor history, documentation. But there are so many institutions across the country and the world that collect like we do. In my field, there's also kind of a budding interest in creating community archives. So that's not like an old institution that might be seen as stodgy and ancient, who are then like gatekeepers to the information. A community archive would be something that was created by the people who did the thing. So it could be, along ethnic lines. It could be along like a certain community or organization. Like here in Madison, there was a Madison radical oral history project going on for a while. So like political radicals interviewing each other for an oral history collection. So it wasn't something done by my institution. But yeah, I assure you, like, you're in the Philadelphia area.
Right.
There's so much history there.
You're right.
And there's going to be, like you're going to have probably letters from the founding fathers in your area. It's actually a really saturated field. There's almost too many archivists.
So you were talking about then making it available. So are there websites that people can find where maybe their own state institution has done this and then they could kind of hear some of this stuff? Or is that not really what it's going for here?
Well, it really depends. So I would say you could start with something like the Library of Congress would be a good one to start with if you wanted to just listen in general. But in terms of like hearing something in particular, it's going to matter what your research dictates, basically. So a really good one could be what's called DPLA. That's the Digital Public Library of America. And what they're trying to do is take the metadata and the records from many institutions onto one portal, which is their website. So you browse their website, and it searches all the hubs that are across the country. And you can search by audio. There's a really cool project that just, what's it called? So there's a really cool project called the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. And they collected a bunch of community radio and TV and put it all into one portal. And they have like an online reading room. They call it like a, quote, reading room. And it's really just a listening area. So there's just everywhere. It's hard because there's so much out there and it's so lost. And that's part of what I'm trying to do in the audio signal is I highlight some of this archival audio.
And there are some big name mainstream podcasts that I think are kind of reaching into similar resources of archived audio. I know, Fugitive Waves from the Kitchen Sisters has done a lot of that type. What they have, Lost and Found audio or something of that nature, where they're pulling out some of that old stuff. So is that when we hear things like that and some of the bigger shows, are they probably going back to agencies and groups and efforts like you're a part of to find this stuff, you think?
Absolutely. They could be doing that. They could be getting it sent to them. One problem that we struggle with is information professionals generally want information to be free and open and out to everybody. But a lot of the people who donate stuff to us have restrictions on them. And that could be restrictions for personal reasons. Like maybe they badmouth their lover or something and don't want anyone to know until they're dead.
Right.
So we have a lot of stuff that's like restricted until death or restricted until like 2050. But then there's also a lot of copyright issues. Right. So it would really depend, like in terms of the Kitchen Sisters, they're great, but they could also be getting it. I know they're oral historians, so they could be, some of their audio they're doing themselves. Another one that does it is a podcast called A Little Dusty. And the host's name is John. I forget his last name. But he brings to light like just short little clips, like 5-minute, 10-minute clips of people of historical archival audio. So the latest one was Jackie Robinson talking. And
Nice.
He doesn't source where he got that. So I'm not really sure where he got that. The other interesting thing is sound isn't really in the public domain. So you can't just say that it's like mix, like do whatever you want with it. But in terms of what a lot of archives do is we establish kind of like a fair use copyright on top of it.
There's so much interesting stuff there, and I imagine that it's got to be intriguing work more often than not. And I appreciate you talking a little bit about it because, like I said, it's something we've never covered here on the Podcast Digest. And as we see it be more and more integrated into some of the shows that we just mentioned, it's interesting now that when we hear that we know a little bit more about kind of how the road to accomplish that maybe came to be. So that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, there's also, I don't know if we have time to talk about it, but there's also just like, I'm worried about the archival quality of podcasts today. So actually, archival quality is the wrong word. I'm just worried about the preservation of podcasts today. So, like, are you, Dan Lizette, are you doing good work to preserve your digital files?
Well, that all depends on our friends at Dropbox. At this.
See, okay. So let me just do a quick run through of like basic digital preservation that podcasters can do, if we have time.
Sure.
Okay. So there's a few big things that I think we should worry about, because if we think we're so great right now, don't we want our grandchildren to be able to discover this stuff too, right?
Sure.
So organize your files. Use descriptive names so that those would make sense to an outsider. Descriptive, file naming, folder naming, that kind of stuff. There's also a term called locks, which is just LOCKSS, and it literally just means lots of copies keep stuff safe.
Nice.
So, back up your stuff. You should probably have it on an external hard drive on site and another backup that's in the cloud. So Dropbox is great for that. And then use open source files. So think thoughtfully about what's called media obsolescence. And if you've used floppy disks, you know exactly what that means.
And I've heard people talk about this, that conceptually, at least right now, most people are not overly concerned with MP3 because MP3 has been around for 20 plus years, and there's no reason to believe that it won't be here in another 20 or 30.
Exactly. So archivists save everything in a WAV file because it's lossless,
right,
which means it wasn't compressed. And MP3 we use for user copies. So we get, kind of weird, and we have master preservation copies that go into cold storage, which means that they go into like a deep, like Amazon has a product called Glacier, and it's kind of like a deep, dark server where you're not supposed to touch the file because we're worried about bit rot and corrupting the file in any way. But we try to work with all open source, and MP3 is one of them. It's just it's what we call lossy, so it's compressed.
Right, yeah.
But it's still, I think it's going to be good. The other thing I think is interesting is, so I really hope that people are saving the records that they're creating when they're just creating the final interview. When I was a student, I went to the New Yorker, or to New York, and I went to the New Yorker archives for my thesis, and I got to read like drafts of editorials and and articles, and I geeked out so hard. And I would just love to think that in 50 years, there will be a bright young researcher who hears about this guy, Dan Lizette, or maybe like Rob McGinley Myers. And
it'll be Rob, not me.
So let's say Rob or Tally or Megan, and that they'll kind of want to know, what Tally's notes were and what research she did. And then her raw interviews that she then created into a final. Because I assure you that this will be something discussed in many years to come. And researchers, scholars, and fans will care so much. So I hope that people are also thinking about saving that. And my last little point is, are you familiar with the Internet Archive at all?
I believe so, yes. The one that...
Have you heard of the Wayback Machine?
Yes.
So that's the other thing, is I feel like our websites are changing a lot. So, I hope that some of the Radiotopia sites got what's called captured into the Wayback Machine while they were running that campaign recently, because it's, once it goes away forever. So, put a little calendar note to pop your page into Wayback Machine every once in a while.
Yeah, and there's so many good points there, Dana, for sure. And, it just made me think that, I've got all my wedding photos. I've got both the original CDs I was given, and I made copies onto a hard drive or a thumb drive, and both of them live in a fireproof box in my closet.
That's great.
It probably wouldn't be a bad idea every 25 episodes or something of the podcast digest to just drop those files onto a thumb drive and toss the thumb drive in the fireproof box, as well as, I've got all the files obviously in Dropbox, but also with Libsyn. But those are also two services that I'm paying for. So if for some reason I stop paying, or for some reason they go under, who knows what would happen. And I probably should be, and maybe podcasters listening to this will also make them think that if, the only thing you've got is, even if it's just on your computer and in Libsyn, it's probably not good enough, because if your house burns down and then the next day Libsyn goes out of business, well, boom.
Or you just, Jeremy Morris here at UW-Madison, he's been working on building this large podcast database. And part of what he's doing is creating mirror sites so that, and copies of it. And he's putting a special eye at the moment on lo-fi produced kind of stuff. So stuff that isn't NPR. With the assumption that if they run out of money and they close down their Libsyn hosting or something,
right,
it just goes away,
right.
So there are people who are trying to do the work, but I think it's going to be slow in coming. And I'm just putting a call out there for podcasters to start thinking like archivists. And if they have any questions, I'd be so happy to talk to them.
Awesome. Good stuff, Dana, for sure. Well, speaking of great stuff that we want to preserve.
Yeah.
Definitely, hopefully these things will be preserved. And these are going to be our show recommendations for this week's episode. I've got two shows that I'm going to be telling folks about, and you've brought two shows, Dana. So as I always do on these recommendation episodes, would you like to go first, or would you like me to lead the way?
I'm going to have you lead the way.
Very well. I will start us out first. Okay. So, folks, here we go. Get your pen and paper ready, or at least get ready to scroll over to the show notes and hit the links that you will find there for all of these great shows that Dana and I are about to tell you about. The first one is Up on Me, and this show is recently just become one of my mandatory listens, and I know I say that every time I sit here and talk about great shows, but this one's definitely true, especially because they are trying to increase their frequency, which I'll talk about in just a minute. This show is called Reveal. Reveal is at revealnews.org. They are on Twitter. Those links in there. Show hosted by Al Letson, but this show has a huge team behind it. It's from the Center for Investigative Reporting and PRX. So you guys may be familiar with PRX. They are one of the organizations that are a part of or behind lots of huge shows, including Radiotopia, This American Life, and so many others. And it's with good reason, the Public Radio Exchange. This show is basically, how can I put this? It's sort of like the contemporary podcast version of 60 Minutes. And they cover some big topics in the show. It's all based on it's from the Center for Investigative Reporting. So this is sort of that behind the scenes, deep dive, hard-hitting journalistic approach to tell stories about situations that either one, you haven't heard of, or two, if you have heard about it, bringing details to light that you've not seen scroll across the bottom of your CNN TV screen. That's for sure. So some recent episodes, they've covered things like the deaths of oil workers and who's responsible, the meatpacking industry in China and its effect on the worldwide food supply. People have heard about the water shortage issues in California, and they went in and found out basically who those people are and held them accountable and done big-time research on determining, why these people are using this. Healthcare facilities and what sort of happens behind a lot of the closed doors. Some of the recent episodes have been mind-blowing with some of these mental health facilities and what has happened in them, and just will not make you look at one of those facilities in the same way, or at least have a question about what may or may not be happening. The show, for most of its life so far, has been a monthly show, and it makes sense when you listen to these episodes. They're not gargantuan in length per se. They vary a little bit, but they are deep. This is field recording, interviews, going through a lot of, police reports or previous interviews that maybe they conducted with TV stations or whatever the case may be, and they just really dig into all of this. They send reporters traveling all across the world to go get the story. They're trying to go to weekly, which is what I mentioned earlier. And I mentioned to you, Dana, before we started recording, it's mind blowing that a show like this could actually potentially come out weekly. Even shows with big budgets and big producers behind them, like This American Life. Every 6 This American Lives or so is a rerun. And why do they do that? Because they're still working on the next week's show, basically, because it takes so much work into each episode. And if Reveal ends up going weekly, it must take a mind-numbing amount of effort to do that. So they've got a Kickstarter going on right now. The link for that will also be in the show notes. I'm not necessarily saying you guys should or shouldn't give them money. What you should do is listen to a couple episodes and feel like if it's something that you would like to support, because this is not your average podcast, if you will. What you will hear in the stories that they're telling, the facts and the truth that they're uncovering, I like my simile. I'm calling it the 60 minutes of the podcast world right now, and it's pretty impressive, some of the stuff they're putting out there.
I know. I really hope they go weekly. I think we'll be a better world for it.
So you're familiar with Reveal, right, Dana?
I love Reveal.
What are your thoughts on it?
So much. It's really one of the things that one of the kinds of podcasts that gets my blood pumping. It never really has a call to action at the end, but I always feel like I want to do something, and I feel invigorated, and sad for some of the things that they talk about, but then that I want to go out there and help. And I love listening to Al Letson.
Yes, the host. We were talking about it before. It's one of those ones where people incredulously to me are always telling me, "Oh, I love your voice," and I'm like, "No, whatever." But this guy, Al Letson, yeah. Wow, I turn into everybody else in terms of he's just got a great sound, a great narrator that kind of guides you through these stories, and he's just a wonderful professional, and he's a great host. He is. He really he gives the story breathing room. It's not really about him; it's about the story. You can tell that it's important to him. The other thing I really like about Reveal is that it doesn't matter what's going on in the world that day. They aren't just following the headlines. It's all about all of their investigative reporting, and I think it's just so important. Absolutely, and it's what in so many ways is going away in old media. And you hear the stories all the time about journalists for newspapers who now no longer have photographers. They have to bring their iPhones, and cutbacks, and a lot of the print and magazine journalists and a lot of the big deep dive investigative journalists lived in those genres because there's just not that many TV stations or TV shows, network broadcasts to do these type of things. But podcasting is now finding a new home for a lot of those folks, and folks compelled to produce that type of information up and coming. And Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting and PRX is a perfect example of what, while some of the old media's financing of these efforts starts to dwindle, if podcasting in that format can start to pick that up and even expand upon it and do it even further, I think, like you mentioned, Dana, we're all the better for it.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
So that's my first show recommendation. Over to you, Dana. What is your first show recommendation?
Okay, so kind of in the same vein, in terms of making the world a better place. Mine is called Tiny Spark, and I'm recommending it because I feel like it just brings good into the world, and after the few weeks that we've had globally, that we really need this. And it's also independent investigation. It reports, it goes really deep into topics like philanthropy and nonprofits, international aid, and just generally social good. And the tagline is actually investigating the business of doing good. The host is Amy Costello. She's a journalist from Africa, or she's a journalist who was the African correspondent for 5 years for the popular program The World. So she's coming at this with lots of experience, and she's very knowledgeable. And obviously, from the reporting she's done, she's seen, the NGOs and the different aid organizations that come in. She's seen them come in and out and knows kind of what's working and what's not. So the website's tinyspark.org. I know, though, that you'll list that in the show notes. They also list kind of very helpfully, they have a favorites section of theirs. So it's tinyspark.org/favorites if you just kind of want to get a start with it. And these are they're not exactly evergreen audio that'll always be relevant, but it's not something, you can listen to it a year out and it's still important and good. It's supported by a grant. So, let me see. Oh, hold on. I lost my place. Supported by a grant, the William and Flora Hewlett's Foundation. And I think they just do really, really good work. I think we're just in dire need of reminders that there are good, effective, productive people out there, and there's help to be given, and that there's working people and organizations that have extremely smart ideas and solutions, and they have critiques of what you might think is the mainstream way of helping people. They're into topics like effective philanthropy, transparent aid, both foreign and domestic. And that's important to me because I don't make a lot of money, but I like to give when I can, and I want to know when my financial help is effective, and I want to support good programs that are doing work with people. So I'm really new to this podcast. I have gone back and listened to some of the archives. My first episode was pretty recent. It was called Good Deeds in Cold Blood, and it's about altruists who help others consistently and with a logical bent, because they just can't feel like they can do anything else. They give away a lot of their money and a lot of their time. Identify with that feeling of wanting to help very strongly. So it's not people that give after they see a disaster or jump in to save someone's life when they have to because they're heroes. So that was my first introduction episode, and I totally loved it. So I went back and listened to some other ones. There was an investigation of Tom's shoes, and whether or not it's actually effective, and what the mission of Tom's shoes. The misconception that tech alone can alleviate poverty, because I feel like in this tech-rich America, we think that tech can solve everything. And one of the really, really interesting ones that I just listened to was disaster preparedness in developing countries that are prone to earthquakes. So just really easy things that could have been done to help out a country like Haiti, just by building better. So that's my first one. I think it's a really good one. It'll make you feel good about the world.
Well, I have literally in Pocket Cast just added it, and I realize now why it rang this ever so slight bell in my head. It has been one of their featured podcasts for a couple of weeks now. The album artwork just jumped out to me with the little owl-y looking thing.
So. The owl was kind of something that caught my attention, and I think you've talked about this before, is that good podcast art is important.
It's so important, and I love people that are doing something different with it, and it is something that's different and really stands out, and there are so many great shows that do that. So that one has definitely been added to my subscription list, so thanks for making my week that much more tough to work through the playlist. I'm just going to try to catch up to your numbers of subscriptions. And
well, they are pretty quick.
Oh, that's
so
good.
It's kind of like the same way Reveal can feel like you just got, a long lecture condensed into a beautiful, nugget of information. That's kind of Tiny Spark, too.
Great. Well, that is one that is added as well. And it's funny, you mentioned there talking about natural disasters and building better and stuff, and not necessarily recommended on this episode. We're not highlighting it, but everybody knows by it by this point. New Gimlet show, surprisingly awesome. Just most recent episode did one on concrete, and they talked a lot about the building and the use of concrete and how it played into the Haiti earthquakes and sort of what happened there. So just a little side note there.
I just listened to that today,
Did you?
and I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought about highlighting Surprisingly Awesome as my episode, but
it's picking up, I think. I honestly was not too blown away with the first one. The second one got a little better, and I think this last one was the best yet. So I think they're kind of getting in their groove as time goes on, and I'm looking forward to more. So
I agree. Yeah.
All right, time for my second show recommendation, and this is one that I talk about sort of highlighting bigger and smaller shows. This is a big one. Many of you may have heard of this. It comes from the ginormous podcast production, which is Earwolf, which, ironically enough, I don't know that I've ever featured or recommended any shows from Earwolf in the past, so I'm happy to at least be doing that, although I can tell you I have calls out to some of the hosts, and if they would ever check in reply to their email, maybe I could bring you a conversation with one of them, but I do like a lot of what they do over there, and one of their newer editions is an interesting concept. It's one of those shows that is kind of like, wow, why didn't anyone else think of doing this before? But it's Question of the Day. Question of the Day, hosted by James Altucher and Stephen Dubner, two big names if you haven't heard of them before. Let me just give you a little bit of background about who these two people are. Stephen Dubner, yeah, he's the guy who wrote Freakonomics. Okay, so
that guy.
That guy, maybe you've heard of Freakonomics. But they also did a sequel, Super Freakonomics, and then a prequel, Think Like a Freak, a couple years ago. So he's put out several books, and so he's obviously a big name in the world. James Altucher is another huge kind of entrepreneurial style and a frequent writer. He's a hedge fund manager, a best-selling author, a prolific podcaster. He does a lot of business type things. He's had a podcast for a while called The James Altucher Show that has had huge guests like Mark Cuban, Adam Carolla, Tim Ferriss, Seth Godin. He's interviewed all of these guys. And now they have sort of come together to do Question of the Day, and it's pretty much exactly what you may think it is. It is a question that the two of them sort of banter back and forth. Sort of the backstory of the show is that these two guys apparently been friends for years. They would always kind of catch up and talk, and they would play backgammon together.
I love that about the backgammon thing.
And so they've just sort of basically started to record these conversations, and it's clear right off the bat a couple things. One, they got a great back and forth. They got a great sort of conversational style. And two, that these are not your blasé, normal, everyday guys. Obviously, with their accomplishments and backgrounds, they have certain characteristics about them that have led them to their success. And so they kind of take on these sort of, in some cases, kind of blasé topics, but others big topics like depression. But they do things like family vacations and different things like that. And it's a really cool show. I am not. It's funny. I will make a confession here, Dana. Some 3 weeks ago, I tweeted something, and not that anyone listening is like trolling my Twitter feed to the point that they would remember this little minuscule tweet from 3 weeks ago.
You never know.
But this is exactly the show I was referring to, because while I do love this show and I do recommend it, and I want you folks who haven't checked out Question of the Day to do so, because I think it's different and it's unique. They do one thing that drives me crazy. Normally, these are less than 20 minutes. Even though the Question of the Day, it's not daily, although they just finished a daily run. Now they're back to 3 times a week. The only thing that drives me crazy about it, and I'm all for podcasters having their work supported. This is Earwolf. These are big guys. They are being paid, so something to do the show, and that's perfectly fine. But when you've got a 12-minute episode and 4.5 of those minutes are ad space, it starts to bother me. It seems like it's out of balance just a little bit. They usually only have one mid-roll ad and then a kind of rehash of the same ad at the end. I actually think they are also working on that, because I'm wondering if they got that feedback, not from me, not that they're watching my Twitter feed, because it sort of has gotten a little bit better in previous weeks. But about 3-4 weeks ago, they were putting out between a 9 and 12-minute episode with anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes being ads, and it was driving me crazy. Now they're more kind of 15 to 20 minutes, and I think it's down to more like 2.5 to 3 minutes. So I think they've kind of achieved a little bit better balance. So I just want to point that out in terms of fairness. I do not get negative on the Podcast Digest, and I'm not necessarily saying that that's a negative thing, but because these guys should be compensated. But I just want to point that out to anyone who may not necessarily find it that appealing. But heads up, it's fine. But the show itself and the conversations these two gentlemen have are worth your subscription and worth checking out. Dana, I understand this is another show you're familiar with.
Yep, I do listen to it. I have to say, though, that I don't listen to every episode, and the daily one was a little overwhelming for me.
Yeah, I missed many. I probably missed 40% of them.
Yeah, I listened pretty regularly in the first, 10. Kind of like, okay, this is what this is about. And I like the guys. They're good guys. I think they think about things in an interesting, complex way, but sometimes they would also say things that kind of rub me the wrong way a little bit. Like, hey, did you ever think about how poor people might feel about that? Or
right.
Or women or something, But overall, then I think they it's the Freakonomics way, though. He says something that might seem a little weird or kind of off at the outset, and then as he dives into it, you kind of realize where he's going with it. I also really like that they get the questions off Quora.
Right.
I think that's interesting. But yeah, it's kind of my, if I have time and feel like listening, I did listen to the depression episode because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I like that too. Their take on it was really interesting as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of those ones where I episode title filter, right? If the title comes in, I'm like, ooh, that could be interesting. Once you get to know these two and their banter and their perspective enough after 4 or 5, then you can kind of apply this. Ooh, I want to hear their take on this, and
exactly.
And kind of
I do think they're very charming guys, and that they're going to have something good to say. But first, it's like show notes or episode filter. Oh, by the way, just a plug for show notes. I love podcasts with good show notes because it just gives me such a good do I want to listen to this? Okay, I do. But yeah, with question of the day, it really matters what they say, what's going to happen about whether or not I'm going to listen.
So that's my second show recommendation, folks. That's something out there to check out. If you haven't done so, like I said, not everything that Dana or I recommend, or I've recommended in 67 episodes so far, will you always like. But I think it's worth checking out. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. But maybe you will. And if you do, I think you'll enjoy this one. So
yeah, it's kind of fun and it's short.
Yeah. Your second show recommendation, Dana.
Okay, so my second one is, we talked a little bit about this before, but it's kind of a big one in the history podcaster community, but I think it's a pretty small one or less well-known one in the, wider podcasting community. So it's from 2010. So I know that sounds like it's super old, but it's definitely still relevant and it's evergreen. One of those it always matters. And it is called History of the World in 100 Objects. It's a project between BBC Radio 4 and the British Museum, and the British Museum director Neil McGregor hosts it. But just an FYI, I read that he's actually retiring next month, so there's that. It was broadcast on BBC Radio 4 over about 20 weeks, and then it was actually eventually made into a book. So if you prefer that, you could read it. It's exactly 100 episodes, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It tells the history of the world through 100 objects. And I really love it. And I started to re-listen, because I actually listened to this before bed while I was in graduate school. And I would come out of my dark world of all the work I had to do and just dig back into history. So it helped me keep passionate about my work, since it's not just telling the story of where the objects came from, but about the preservation of the objects. And I don't know. I just really, really like it. It's just always so fun to listen to. And the Wikipedia page is also really interesting. Just so you know, like it kind of like puts everything into the era that the object is in. And then if you go to the British Museum website, you can actually see the objects it's talking about. So some of the example objects, and it starts like at the Ice Age. The last episode, spoiler alert, is about solar panels. So
that's a big range.
yeah. So it starts. So some examples are like a Clovis spear point from New Mexico, Celtic, the Basse yuts, like flagons for wine and mead, a Korean roof tile. So it covers the whole globe, because the British Museum, of course, has things from everywhere. And, you know, sometimes they've stolen things from everywhere. But then it has topics like what they call after the Ice Age, and that's food and sex. They have a topic that's called the world in the age of Confucius, the first global economy, and that one happens in like 1400s. And then the world of our making, which is our world right now, what they might call like the Anthropocene. I think I said that right.
Sounded good.
Oh, good. Well, there we go. And it's definitely, for me, it's evergreen and interesting. It's maybe not a traditional podcast, because after 100 episodes, it ended. So maybe it's something more like an audiobook, but it takes you on this kind of like PBS-like journey through the entire history of the world. And I don't know, I just had a lot of fun listening to it. I found it extremely fascinating, and I hope everyone else likes it too.
Well, history buffs, sounds like if you've got any proclivity towards history, this is one that you should check out as well. And of course, links will be in the show notes, as I like to say so frequently.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because you can see the objects, and they're quite beautiful. So it's another thing that if you know, maybe not even just history buff, but you don't have the chance to travel to the British Museum or Korea, you know, you can kind of see some objects that come from those different places. And it really does try to give you a global perspective.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, that will be our 4 show recommendations. So we've got Reveal, Tiny Spark, Question of the Day, and History of the World in 100 Objects. So all of that will be available to you guys. And so we have done another great job. And Dana, I want to thank you for joining me and helping folks fill up their subscription list with great stuff. So we are collectively and independently and collaboratively solving the discoverability problem in podcasting right here, right now.
And ruining people's eardrums.
At least their free time. Or
their free time.
We're all going to become just like you. We'll be the elevator person that, you know, fake talks to people in hopes they don't say anything other than hello, so that we can keep listening to this great stuff.
And get so mad when people I know talk to me on the bus.
It's like, you know what I'm doing right now. Leave me alone.
This is my job.
That's right.
This is what I have to do.
Support me.
I know, exactly.
Well,
I
Dana,
hope people really like it.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. And when I shot out that initial contact with you, and not thinking that I'm some crazy person, and glad that you were able to take some time here out of your evening to talk about some great podcasts for folks. And so before we go, please take as much time as you like. Let people where they can find out more about you and the audio signal and anything else you'd like to let them know about.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Let's see, tinyletter.com/the audio signal. You can find out a little bit more about me too at about.me/Dana Gerber-Margie. That's kind of like sort of my professional portfolio. And then, I don't know, I'm on Instagram. I'm at tcode, TEACODE. And I'm mainly posting pictures of like my cats and old audio. So you can see my lab. My audio lab is really cool.
Awesome.
I think.
Well, I'm going to have Dana's links to everything she just mentioned also there, and our wildly exhaustive show notes at this point. So I think I'm going to have to get up a little earlier Sunday morning to get everything assembled for this one.
Sorry
But
about that.
no, that's great because it's all interesting stuff, and I think folks will appreciate it. To your point, I want to make sure that the show notes are an effective tool for folks to be able to find all this stuff.
If it makes you feel better, my Sundays are also gone because of the audio signal.
Usually for me, it's just the AM. Once I get it out in the morning, then I kind of just sit back and watch all the Twitter fun afterwards. So
I should learn from that.
Well, folks, Dana, thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you.
A lot of fun.
This was a lot of fun.
And folks, that will do it for this week here on the Podcast Digest. Episode 67 is done and there for you. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know. Talk to me on Twitter at Pod Digest, or better yet, an iTunes review would be awesome. Just got another great one this week from the folks at Comatose Podcast. I want to give them a shout out because they were way over kind to me in an iTunes review. So if you guys are super nice and kind to me, I will be sure to mention you here on the Podcast Digest as well. So thanks, folks at Comatose. Folks, that'll do it for this week. My name's Dan Lizette. I'll be back again next week with more great stuff for your subscription list here on the Podcast Digest.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at Pod Digest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.